Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Fredericton Candidates Forum on the Housing Crisis. My name is Rachel Cave. We begin tonight with an acknowledgement that this evening's forum is being organized on the unceded territories of the Wolastoqiyik, and that these lands are subject to the peace and friendship treaties signed between the Wolastoqiyik, Mi'kmaq, and Passamaquoddy and the British Crown starting in the 1700s. As we consider solutions to the housing crisis, the organizers ask that we reflect on what it means to be treaty people with a shared responsibility to take care of each other and the land. Tonight's forum is organized by the New Brunswick Coalition for Tenants Rights and anti-poverty organizations, the Common Front for Social Justice and ACORN NB. With housing costs skyrocketing and tenants facing evictions, and no vacancies during a pandemic, housing has become one of the top election issues in the federal 2021 election. Tonight, you will hear from 6 of the 7 candidates seeking election as Fredericton's Member of Parliament on what they propose as housing solutions. We regret that the candidate for the Conservative Party of Canada, Andrea Johnson, declined the invitation. The format for tonight's forum will include 4 questions from the organizers, researchers who study various aspects of the housing crisis in New Brunswick. And then we will take questions from the audience. So audience members, please use the chat room to ask questions and offer comments. The chat button is found at the bottom of your Zoom screen. We will monitor the chat room as well as the Facebook Live discussion board, and we will take 4 audience questions at the end. Candidates will have 1 minute to answer those questions. So everything is based on 1 minute tonight. Candidates, at the end of 1 minute, your mic will be muted, but you will see a notification on your screen in the chat at the 45-second mark, letting you know that you have 15 seconds to wrap up your remarks. So tonight's forum will also be recorded and published on the NB Media Co-op website, and it will be there for later viewing. Okay. Let's begin. I will now turn it over to the candidates to introduce themselves. Candidates, you have 1 minute, and tonight we will start with the Liberal Party of Canada candidate, Jenica Atwin.
Thank you. I was panicking there for a moment. Thank you so much, Rachel, as well, for being our moderator this evening. Thank you to my fellow candidates, and thank you to the audience for joining us tonight for such a critical, important discussion. And you know, it should be no secret as to why this has become such a hot button issue for this year's election. We learned so many hard lessons throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, and the housing crunch was certainly one that was hard felt here in the Fredericton area in particular. And you know, I am so excited to represent the Liberal Party this time around. The party platform has 86 pages, and there are 76 mentions of housing in the platform. It is bold, it is innovative, and I really believe it's going to lead us towards some concrete solutions moving forward, because that's what Canadians need right now. We need a real plan. We need a costed plan. We need a plan that looks to a sustainable future for all. So very excited. One particular piece I'll just mention quickly is the idea to have a federal housing advocate appointed within 100 days after election. It's going to be a critical piece in addressing the homelessness issue in particular. So thank you again. Thank you for everyone for joining us tonight. Let's have a wonderful discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenica. To the next candidate, to introduce yourself, Libertarian Party of Canada candidate, Brandon Kirby.
Hi, thank you so much. I appreciate you guys having me. I am a real estate owner. I was a mortgage specialist for over 5 years. And today what I would like to be discussing is what it takes to increase the supply of housing within New Brunswick. It's a good thought to say tenants' rights, but really the best sort of tenants' rights is when you have so many options as to where you could go, and you can say to the landlord, people like me, and say, okay, well, what can you do for me? Are utilities included? Can you come down on the rent? So what we really want to do is focus in on increasing the supply of housing, because that in and of itself is the greatest leap forward for tenants. I'd also like to discuss, if we have time to do it, REITs and some of the advantages that they could have for the province, because I am also taking out a position in a REIT as well. So maybe not the most friendly or common political view that tenants' rights advocates are used to, but it's going to be a little bit different. We're going to have some fun.
Thank you, Brandon Kirby. The next candidate, please introduce yourself. Green Party of Canada candidate, Nicole O'Byrne.
Yes, hi everyone. It's delightful to be here this evening to talk about such an important issue. And we've had a lot of conversations over the last couple of weeks, but it's nice to have ones that's specifically targeted on housing. I'm a law professor. How does that matter when it comes to talking about housing? Well, it comes down to Canadian federalism and navigating cost sharing agreements. And how do we get federal, provincial, municipal governments to work together? And that's the essence underlying the housing crisis. Now, if you have a chance, take a look at the Green Party platform, because we're the only party, and maybe Shawn will take a little umbrage at that statement, we'll see, but we're the only party who really prioritizes nonprofit housing and getting the government back into the housing business instead of subsidizing free enterprise solutions, which we've seen over the last 20, 30 years just are not working.
Thank you, Nicole O'Byrne. Our next candidate to introduce himself, NDP candidate Scott Oldenburg. Scott. Shawn.
Sean.
Sorry, beg your pardon.
Oh, wait. I'm here. It's Sean. Hi, everyone. I'm Shawn Oldenburg, your NDP candidate for Fredericton. I want to extend a special thank you to ACORN, the Ndp Coalition of Tenants, the Ndp Media Co-op, and Common Front for Social Justice for organizing this event. On September 20th, you have a choice between the parties that have broken one promise after another, or voting for Jagmeet Singh and the NDP who are fighting for you. And I'll tell you why. In every corner of this country, families are worried about jobs, the health of our loved ones, the climate crisis, the public services that everybody counts on. It's also thrown us, to the decisions of the Liberal and Conservative governments. Many of the supports that we rely on just weren't there when we needed them. If we want different results, we have to make better choices. We can make life more affordable for everyday people by investing in healthcare, affordable housing, and pharmacare. We can build an economy that works better for more people by providing universal.
Thank you, Shawn. I think we hit the 1 minute mark there. My apologies for, I had a typo here. The next candidate, Communist Party of Canada, candidate June Patterson. June.
Hello. Can you hear me?
We can.
Awesome. Okay. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to all the organizers and my fellow candidates. So today, I'm June Patterson. I'm representing the Communist Party of Canada, and I think that our party has really the most comprehensive and serious plan to tackle this real crisis, because housing has been a crisis during this campaign. I myself am a renter who has experienced rent hikes within the last year. We all heard the story of Marie Roy from Bathurst, who saw a $1,000 rent increase while living on a $1,600 pension. We believe that housing is a fundamental human right. We want to enshrine that in law. And we think that affordable.
June, I think we hit the 1 minute mark there. Hopefully you are seeing your 15-second notices in the chat. One more candidate to introduce, independent candidate Jen Smith. Jen.
Hi everyone, I'm Jen Smith. Bonjour tout le monde. Merci pour l'invitation ici ce soir. I think the first step with any problem is an acknowledgement and admitting that there is one, which is obviously a significant problem with Premier Higgs. So that's like first, battleground number one. I'm like June, I am also a renter myself. I'm barely staying on top of it. So these rent evictions that are taking place with cosmetic surgery, basically throwing some paint on and jacking up the rent, tied to like homelessness and not having a living wage. There's so many issues and loss of jobs because of COVID, like it all ties together. So, it's a serious issue, the housing crisis, and we can talk about platform promises all day, but in the end, that's what they are, promises, and we'll see what happens. So.
Okay, I think we got a round in with introductions for all the candidates. So let's turn to question number one. Canada, lost more than 330,000 affordable rental units between 2011 and 2016. That was 15 times the number of new affordable units that were built during that same period. This was driven by real estate investment trusts and other corporate landlords taking advantage of low vacancy rates to charge higher rents and repositioning housing towards higher income renters. It is entirely possible that the 2021 census will show us that since Canada has lost hundreds of thousands of more affordable units. The question tonight is, how would you or your party ensure that more affordable units are not lost? And we'll begin with the independent candidate, Jen Smith.
Thank you. There are several steps, I think, in the process, after identifying, first of all, the key areas of concern, which I sort of alluded to in the beginning. Obviously, we need to have cap increases on rent. We had people flocking here from other provinces, and it's forced the prices to go up. So I think that there needs to be an agreement or some kind of a deal worked out between like land developers, builders, and the government, so that we have subsidized housing that is inclusive of a percentage to be for low income. We have a lot of land, that needs to be developed. I think that I'm starting to run out of time again already. A minute goes very quick. My goodness. I think I'm out of time. I'm getting 2 warnings. So.
Okay, Jen, thank you.
Sorry.
We'll go to the next candidate for this question, Communist Party candidate, June Patterson. June.
Well, the Communist Party proposes that housing, all affordable housing, be geared to income. So 20% of income would be the most that anybody should spend on housing. This should be mandated by law and should be achieved by rent rollbacks and also the construction of 1 million units of affordable housing, affordable meaning rent geared to income at 20%. This should be social housing. It should be built on public land under public control. I don't think we should be giving away any public land to developers who will then sell so-called affordable units at $1,500 a month. We need publicly owned, democratically controlled housing geared to income, and that includes zero. So if you have no income, you should still be housed.
Thank you, June. The NDP candidate next, Shawn Oldenburg.
Technology difference problems. We did have a national housing strategy, but it was canceled in the 1980s. We need to build a recovery that works for all of us, not just at the top. In May of this year, New Brunswick had a rent increase by 4%, the highest in 43 years. And the NDP will, instead of helping billionaires get richer, we'll ask them to pay their fair share with a wealth tax and put in a foreign place buyer's tax. Creating more public housing, the NDP has promised to create 500,000 units. Give the communities, and I don't care if it's cities that have the ability to take quick and decisive action and just end the housing crisis. We can do it together. Waiving the federal portion of HST GST and the construction of affordable homes and apartments, and ending money laundering practices that are commonly in the industry. There are people being evicted because landlords are raising the rents way too quick, way too fast, and it has to.
All right. Gone to a minute there, Shawn Oldenburg, NDP candidate. Next candidate, Green Party candidate, Nicole O'Byrne.
First thing we need to do is to declare a housing emergency, right? And then that will reconfigure priorities at all various levels of government, because it is the cooperation that's been lacking. We would, as the Green Party, appoint a federal housing advocate and have all the supports and officers involved in that kind of enterprise, assessing the role of things like real estate investment trusts. And maybe Brandon can give a good defense of them tonight, but so far all I see is them being very problematic. We'd also appoint a Ministry of Housing to look at the problem because of the scope and the depth of the problem. And free enterprise solutions have not been addressing the need. So that's what I can do in 1 minute, folks. This is quite a hair-raising format. Off to the next person.
Okay, thank you, Nicole O'Byrne. Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby, please.
Here we go. Thank you. Yeah, this is where experience matters, because in the last campaign, 2019, this issue came up, and I said the big issue is CMHC. I've got a lot of experience in real estate, a lot of experience with mortgages, and I said the problem is CMHC and the regulatory framework, and everyone rolled their eyes. Jenica had a town hall on what to do about homelessness, what to do about rising rent prices. And I said, what's going on with CMHC? And she said, well, you know what? We're not really tackling that at this moment. What happened when the John Howard Society went to go purchase the city motel for the homeless? They got a decline. Can you imagine what sort of a decline they got? A CMHC decline. It's problematic when government bureaucrats and people with internet opinions come along and say, well, look, this is the way I view it, and this is the solution that should happen. We're going to consult with stakeholders. But when people with experience speak up and say, this is what the problem is, it's time for the government of Canada to listen.
Thank you. And finally, Liberal Party candidate Jenica Atwin. Jenica.
Thank you. If we could unmute ourselves, that would be a lot easier. Thank you. I mean, again, in 1 minute is really tough. I think it's important that you have a plan that doesn't pit buyer against rental. I think that will be, something that Brandon would like to hear. I would also agree that, the real estate investment trusts are not a good idea. We need extra protections in place. I think the Rapid Housing Initiative was an incredibly successful program that we saw roll out throughout the COVID-19 pandemic. This is commitments to build specifically affordable units across the country. There's so many things that we can do, again, to go after speculators. If foreign buying, we have to ensure that stock goes to Canadians first. There's a commitment to build 1.4 million in new stock, which is partnerships with developers, with not-for-profits, to empower municipalities as well and in their role in this. So again, it's really hard in such a short time, but there's a really robust plank in the platform that really outlines a key direction forward on what we can do. And again, I agree with, an advocate. I think that really needs to happen right away. And there is a commitment within the first 100 days to ensure that, if someone is appointed and they make this their top priority.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I believe we got all candidates on question number 1. So I'll move on to question number 2. Canada's National Housing Strategy, launched in 2018, commits to spending $70 billion over a decade to create 160,000 new affordable housing units, including more than 1,200 units in New Brunswick. However, the Parliamentary Budget Officer has criticized the rollout of this initiative for failing to meet these commitments. The New Brunswick Coalition for Tenants Rights has noted that it falls far short of what is needed, especially given the waiting list for subsidized housing in New Brunswick had grown to 5,300. This was just before the pandemic. Question: what would you or your party do to strengthen the National Housing Strategy and ensure that there will be adequate and affordable housing for all? And we will begin with Libertarian Party candidate Brandon Kirby.
Thanks. That's a really good question. My take on it is we want to build new houses. I mean, everyone's talking about how evil REITs are. There are places like Killam Properties that want to build new houses. We want to increase the supply and lower rents. I would love to be able to do this, but we're being chased out of the market. It can't happen. We keep saying, okay, you're getting decline after decline after decline. And why are we getting these declines? It's because you have national strategies. When you have these CMHC regulations for downtown Toronto or downtown Vancouver, they sound great on paper. And I won't say that they work for those municipalities, but maybe they make a little bit of sense. They make 0 sense for New Brunswick. The housing needs of downtown Toronto are not the same as the housing needs of rural New Brunswick. They're two completely opposite ends of the spectrum. So we don't need a national strategy. We just need to allow people to plow money into the housing sector. Thank you.
Thank you. And to the Liberal Party candidate, Jenica Atwin.
Well, thank you. So, I mean, there's a great piece in the platform again about it's a new housing accelerator fund, which can grow the annual housing supply in the country cities every year. I do agree that we have to have a New Brunswick lens applied to this because it is different. You're absolutely right, Brandon. We're facing a completely different set of circumstances here in the Atlantic. But this is an application-based fund that would offer support to municipalities to help, provide direction, grow the housing supply faster than the historical average, increase densification, speed up approval times, tackle the NIMBYism that we know all too well here in the Fredericton area, establish inclusionary zoning bylaws as well. Also incorporating the conversation around public transit and locations of affordable housing. I think that's really important in this piece as well. It's also about helping to speed up the time it is to build new homes. There's e-permitting. We're starting to get more creative with how these things are starting to roll out, lessons we learned from the pandemic. And finally, work with municipalities to identify vacant or underused property. A lot of people are working at home now. There's building offices we can use as well. So I think there's a multi-pronged approach here, which is really nice to see.
Thank you. Next to the Green Party candidate, Nicole O'Byrne.
Great. Yeah, well, maybe Brandon and I will find some common ground tonight because the problem is CMHC. We used to have the federal government take an active role in building houses. So if you've seen any of the Adobe houses in Fredericton and in cities all across the country, those were in response to the housing crisis that was caused by World War II. So if we can plan our way out of that, right, and put government money directly into the builds instead of subsidizing and then hoping that the free market economy delivers solutions, which has failed profoundly over the last 20 or 30 years. So looking at the liberal or the conservative approach to this is more of the same. We need a fundamental rethink about how to do this. And the CMHC, which has billions of dollars sitting unused in accounts right now, could be putting that directly into housing. They should be doing that now. The crisis is real, folks.
Thank you. To the NDP candidate, Shawn Oldenburg. Shawn. There we go.
Sorry, thank you very much. We're not helping billionaires get richer. Let's get housing taken care of. There is money out there everywhere, and the wealth tax helps with that. Give the communities the materials and the subsidies that they need to get it done. We'll waive the federal portion of the HST, GST, and create affordable homes. And it ends money laundering that are common in the industry. Excuse me. It can be done. There is a lot of money tied up with bad government spending, and this whole problem was created since the 80s by getting rid of this program. It needs to be funded, and we can do it, and there's no reason we can't. We can start tomorrow. The NDP commits to that.
Thank you. Independent candidate, Jen Smith.
Hi, thank you. Yes, I think I'm going to agree also about the Canada mortgage and housing as well. Red tape is a serious problem in so many levels of government to cut through. It's a slow turning wheel. We also have a problem. I used to work as a financial planner years ago, and we have too much credit. People are getting in over their heads in a lot of instances as well. So you have like a debt service ratio too high, and they're getting over their heads as well. The other thing is that we're the poorest province in Canada with the highest renting increases. So I think it's going to take a collaborative effort. No matter what happens in this election, I'm hoping it's a minority government situation, because I think the more ideas we get coming from different, places, the better it is and more representative it is for us here in New Brunswick with our elderly population as well. We have a huge, baby boomer generation that are, they're living by themselves.
Okay, Jen, I'm sorry, that's a minute. Finally, to the Communist Party candidate, June Patterson.
Yes. Well, we also would like the federal government to get directly back into the business of buying, renting, but also selling homes for people. As I mentioned before, we want the federal government to build 1 million units of affordable housing with rent geared to income at 20%. And we also want to establish federal, provincial, municipal land banks to assemble land for affordable social housing, schools, hospitals, parks, and public works, and to prevent developers and builders from gobbling up valuable public land to inflate housing prices and rents for profit. We want to, and in the case of homelessness, we want to use federal powers to immediately fund the building of emergency shelters and transition housing to get people housed immediately before they can be moved into, hopefully, social housing.
June Patterson, thank you. That's all the candidates on question 2, so I'll move on to question 3. The growing number of homeless constituents is one of the most visible signs of Fredericton's housing crisis. Fredericton has a homelessness problem that cannot be separated from New Brunswick's failing mental health care system and insufficient supports for people facing addiction, and is seen in repeated controversies around tent cities, emergency shelters, and supportive housing initiatives. Negative stereotypes continue to circulate about people surviving homelessness. The question is, what measures would you and your party propose in order to address homelessness in this riding? And we'll begin with the Communist Party candidate, June Patterson.
Well, as I was just saying, we want to use federal powers to end the homelessness crisis as soon as possible. As has been noted, there is money out there. We don't want it put into the hands of middlemen, developers, or nonprofits or whatever. We can build a publicly owned emergency and transition shelter, and we can house people in it right away. There is public land open right now. And as I mentioned before, we want rent geared to income. So if you don't make any money, we don't think you should be evicted or have your house foreclosed on due to losing your job or being unable to make money. We think housing is a fundamental human right, and you should not be thrown out onto the street for any reason.
Thank you, June Patterson. To the next candidate, Green Party of Canada candidate Nicole O'Byrne.
Great, thanks. Of course, there's different levels and different causes of homelessness. So with high acuity homeless people, you really need the full range of social services. So the federal government needs to put significant money into it, but then you need the provincial government to step up and actually provide the services that we need. And then of course, the municipality to provide maybe the land or the placement or whatnot. That's totally different for people who just need a little bit of help. They're going through a tough time in their lives with a transition or whatnot. So we have to be careful when we're looking at homeless to not just kind of put everybody in the same basket, which is why you need, and what we're proposing, an advocate and a Ministry of Housing so that we can actually specify and figure out who needs what, because you cannot solve this problem with a one-size-fits-all policy proposal.
Thank you. Liberal Party candidate Jenica Atwin.
Great. So, I mean, again, I think it's critically important that we have a federal housing advocate because, you know, it's such a multifaceted issue, and it is different for individuals who may perhaps be just one paycheck away from insolvency, for example, or those who may be suffering from opioid crisis or, you know, substance abuse. So, or undiagnosed mental health issues. There's lots of pieces to this crisis, as we know. There's obviously a commitment, you know, to build new stock. We talked about that, affordable units, rental units, but it absolutely is an all hands on deck approach from the federal, provincial and municipal governments. We look at the City Motel project, for example. It got lots of attention. It seemed like it would be the answer to our problems, but we know there are 50 plus individuals on the high acuity list who need that extra wraparound services. So we know that there are amazing organizations, advocates, and not-for-profits working together. I think that's really nice to see. People have gotten out of their silos to help address this issue, but it's going to take a multi-pronged approach from all of us. And it has to include that, again, wraparound, because it's, you know, peer support is an excellent way to do that as well. So thank you for that question.
Okay, Jenica Atwin, thank you. I know it's a tight minute. Next to the independent candidate, Jen Smith.
Yes, a tight minute and brevity is not my strong point. We need to have, and you brought it up in your question about stigma, conversations. We need to have conversations about homelessness with homeless individuals. Addiction does play a huge role, and the stigma associated with that, which is also tied to mental health. So we need to really, I was told, you know, I admittedly had a mental health crisis in 2019, 2020, and being told to hide it and stuff like that is not the way. It's part of the problem, it's not part of the solution. So we have to have these conversations about homelessness, about addiction, and have a tolerance and acceptance. First of all, the subsidized rent needs to be a percentage of the income. Definitely, I agree. I think many of us agree there needs to be a collaborative effort between the levels of government and with different, you know, parties or independent voices as well to advocate for this.
Jen, that's a minute. Next to the NDP candidate, Shawn Oldenburg. Let's see if we can unmute.
Thank you very much. That problem, you're right. There's a lot of different layers to it, but rather than getting advocates, we could fast track this. Premier Higgs could actually sign a piece of paper today and we could get Clinic 554 open. We could get healthcare going here. Pharmacare takes care of that. The homeless situation, they need a place to live, but they also need to be treated. We have to address their needs first. If you take a homeless person and get them into a home, who says they will stay there? Who says they will be healthy there? They need to feel safe and secure, and that a government is going to protect them. And that is what the NDP does. We take care of people. It starts with mental health. Available doctors, nurses, Clinic 554 needs to be opened. That's not even, it just has to be done, and there needs to be 10 more. It needs to be accessible. Trans health needs to be taken care of. Abortion clinics need to be taken care of. Nobody chooses to be homeless. The system has created the homeless.
Okay, thank you. And finally, in this round, Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby.
It's a good question. It was like I was saying before. I mean, there's so much red tape. We are asking for the permission to put money into this problem. And it's not just private investors like REITs that want to build new constructions. It's also charities like the John Howard Society that want to do this, but they're being told no by the federal government. And this is the underlying problem. Now, with respect to mental health, I used to do audits for at-risk youth service delivery providers. Suppose you have service delivery provider A that's working and helping people that come through their doors, and service delivery provider B that's not helping. And you're giving $1 million to A and $1 million to B. Well, B's not working. Get rid of it. Maybe support program A, increase their funding by 50%. You've increased service delivery capacity, but you've cut spending. So when people say, let's just invest, let's pour more money into it, I say, no, let's take a look at the results. What sort of results are you getting for these investments? That's the paradigm we have to adopt.
Okay. And that brings us to the end of question 3, on to question 4. The average house price in Fredericton in the first 7 months of 2021 was almost 25% higher than the first 7 months of 2020. Increasingly in Fredericton, we are hearing about a lack of affordability for people who are trying to buy their first homes. Question: what would you or your party do to help make home ownership more affordable for working people, people with disabilities, the poor, and those on fixed incomes, including seniors? And we'll begin with the NDP, Sean Oldenburg.
Thank you. I'm glad you brought it up. The seniors definitely need help. Everybody needs help. And the NDP wants to make sure everybody gets the backing they need to move forward comfortably. There has to be affordable housing for everybody. And we have to get rid of the foreign investment that's happening and driving up these prices. They have to be either owner occupied, or there needs to be a tax on these ownerships if they're going to be renting them, because Fredericton has the highest rents in New Brunswick, and there's no reason for it. It has to be addressed and taken care of. So ensuring people can get to these places and be comfortable there, that would be my main goal. It has to be taken care of regardless of jurisdiction. It has to be done, and there has to be cooperation on all levels.
Thank you. Next, to the Liberal Party candidate, Jenica Atwin.
Great, thank you. So there's lots of things we can do for this specific question. I'm really excited by a rent-to-own program. Based on principles of respect, it's going to be in collaboration with renters and buyers and landlords as well. I think there's a big piece as well on introducing a first-time home buyers incentive to help eligible first-time home buyers finance a portion of their home purchases through the shared equity mortgage with CMHC. Create a special stream for current renters and landlords to also do a rent to own. So this is all first time, but we're talking about seniors and students as well. There's a great way to bring different generations together under one roof with the new multi-generational home renovation tax. There's so many pieces in here. It's so hard to say in 1 minute. A big piece about announcing Canada's first national tax on vacant properties, so owned by non-residents and non-Canadians, which will come into effect January 1st, 2022. Again, it's protecting, Canadian owned with enforcement as well. So there's establishing the first Canada Financial Crimes Agency to look at, predatory practices that are impacting rates across the market. Thanks so much in such a short period of time.
Thank you. Independent candidate, Jen Smith.
Hi, yes, okay. So, yes, I think we should be helping first-time home buyers, but again, there's a credit issue. People get in over their head. They're given too much money and they can't afford the debt. And owning things comes with responsibility as well. Things break down, decks break, plumbing. There's like owning a home, there comes with it a responsibility for repairs and whatnot. Also with a rent to own, I love the idea, and I'm actually in a rent to own situation, but there's a bit of a ambiguity as to who may be responsible for the repairs until that home is owned, I guess. So there needs to be some sort of a set rule or a standard set so that it's an equal playing field. I don't want to see it. I want to see an integration in low cost housing amongst, in communities. I don't think we need to stick people that are, low income together in one spot. I don't think that's, conducive to, a good.
Okay, Jen Smith, thank you. We'll go next to the Libertarian Party candidate, Brandon Kirby.
Could you repeat the question?
I certainly can. The question is, what would you or your party do to help make home ownership more affordable for working people, people with disabilities,
Right.
the poor, those on fixed incomes, including seniors?
Right. Well, the problem is how much spending is going on right now. It really does matter when you have a minister of finance with no background in finance, because when it's spend, the banks keep printing out money. They'll loan it in the form of mortgages and other loans, and they'll collect it back with interest. What does this do? It increases the monetary supply, devaluing the dollar. And so prices go up, not just in housing, but also in groceries, in commodities. Look, I make a lot of money investing in commodities, investing in cryptocurrency and bank stocks. When you bet against the Canadian dollar and people are spending, you win. So what we have to do is control the spending, and this will prevent the collapse of the Canadian dollar and make life more affordable for Canadians.
Thank you. To the Communist Party candidate now, June Patterson.
Well, as I've mentioned before, we need to get the federal government back into the business of building homes, and not only just social housing for rent. We also do want social housing for sale to own. And in the immediate short term, we want like legal limits on how much somebody can be charged for shelter. Nobody's rent or mortgage should exceed 20% of their income. And as I've mentioned before, we want to make sure that nobody is evicted or have their mortgage foreclosed on due to utility cut or due to job loss, strike, or anything like that. And
oh, go ahead.
Oh no, that yes, we just want to ensure that housing is a human right.
Sorry to interrupt. Next to the Green Party candidate, Nicole O'Byrne.
Yeah, well, it'd be nice to propose very, very quick and easy solutions to a problem that's been building for 30, 40 years. it's essentially a supply demand problem. So we got to work on the supply side. So the Green Party is suggesting that we put together a Canadian cooperative housing strategy, because of course, if you build into a co-op, like any co-op, the benefits, the economic benefits are captured within the community that's actually living and organizing within the co-op. Co-ops are a wonderful economic development solution for problems such as this. There's also other legal instruments like community land trusts and whatnot that would give people that don't have access to capital access to the actual asset and to be able to work into ownership in a meaningful way instead of just relying on private market solutions. There are other alternatives.
Okay, thank you, everyone. That concludes question 4 and the pre-prepared questions by organizers. We have been receiving questions from the audience, and I'd like to turn to our first one now. This comes from Shelley Petit, and the question is, on behalf of the 26.7% of New Brunswickers with disabilities, what will your party do to improve accessible housing for us? And we'll go back to Nicole O'Byrne, Green Party candidate.
Well, I think the first thing you need to do is look at the guaranteed livable income proposals that various parties have put forward. I think ours is particularly comprehensive because if you're living paycheck to paycheck, or if you're living like supplement to supplement, there's so much anxiety there, and there's just not enough planning, right, that you can actually do if you're careening from one crisis to the other. So having kind of a baseline support there for guaranteed livable income is a big step forward to ease off some of this careening from grant to grant, or you never know where your next $100 is coming from. That's just not a way for anyone to live. It would also be part of the National Housing Strategy, the National Housing Advocate, the Ministry of Housing. Of course, the needs of disabled Canadians are different than others, and we have to get a good grasp on what those are in order to formulate policy that addresses those needs properly.
Thank you. Next to the Liberal Party candidate, Jenica Atwin.
Oh, thank you. And I mean, it's critical that this question is asked because there's not always a lens put on accessible housing. And it's such an important piece because we can talk about stock, we can talk about affordable units, but if it's not going to be accommodating to anyone who may have to get around with equipment, who may have special requirements, it's extremely difficult to find housing right now with those kinds of needs. Also, you know, I met with many families with children who have specific requirements, children perhaps on the autism spectrum disorder. I mean, there's lots of extra needs that need to be included in this plan. And I think it's critical that there's a disability advisory group that, you know, helps a housing advocate to ensure that, you know, that their needs are being put forward as well. The government's done a lot to address disability discrimination and exclusion, which is what we're seeing right now in current housing policy. So it's critical. And you're right, there's almost 30% of New Brunswickers that struggle with this issue, and they're not being heard the way that they should. And it's a major gap. Thank you so much, Shelley.
Thank you. Independent candidate, Jen Smith.
Hi, thanks. I do agree with you, Jenica, that the needs of those on disability have not been met. And one of the reasons why is because they were one of the groups who were left behind during COVID. I think they, you know, people on Canada Pension Disability got an extra few $100 payment once. You know, they were among those who did not receive help. So, you know, definitely they're struggling. And I think the key with disability is it needs to be inclusive across the board. And there are different, as Nicole said, we need to identify and recognize what the paradigm is basically within that of the disability that falls within that to ensure that the housing is adequate and equipped to support the disability that they have, which also includes like mental illness as well. And as Jenica said, those on the autism spectrum as well. And, you know, physical disabilities as well, challenges. So.
Jen Smith, thank you. To the Libertarian candidate, Brandon Kirby.
It's an interesting question because the only thing that I'm hearing is that REITs are the devil, REITs are the spawn of Satan. And really the only people that I'm seeing that are building a lot of accessible housing from the private sector are REITs. real estate income trusts, and people don't like them. But what I would recommend is that you just let us build. There's so much red tape. I called out the red tape last election. I called it out at Jenica's town hall. There's so much red tape where we're not allowed to build. Let us build. Let us build and let us have an influx of supply of housing. And when you take a look at killing properties, when you take a look at accessible housing, let us build more of this. This is what I ask. It'll bring down the costs. It'll lower the rents. It's better for everybody. It gives negotiating power. It puts that in the hands of tenants, and that's where we want it.
Okay, Communist Party candidate June Patterson.
Yeah, we would like to see a guaranteed annual livable income instituted to raise living standards and combat poverty, especially among Indigenous people, new immigrants, women, youth, seniors, persons with disability. We want to strengthen and enforce pay, employment, and equity programs for Indigenous people, women, disabled people as well. We also need to ensure that all newly built housing is physically accessible to people with disabilities. Something I'm personally quite passionate about is ensuring that all newly built buildings have, for example, air conditioning and elevators installed to ensure that people can navigate the building, and to ensure that spaces are large enough and livable, and have proper ventilation, for example, because I think a lot of housing is subpar, especially private housing.
Okay, to the last candidate on this question, NDP candidate Shawn Oldenburg.
Well, thank you. That is a great question. They've been ignored too long. People with disabilities, they need accessible public housing, and we need a mandate from private contractors to do such. It's a human rights issue. They've been ignored or taken advantage of too long. And the problem is, with a basic income, you have that security, but right now, if they go to work, if they're on social assistance, they lose the social assistance. So how they can't win, they're stuck in that circle. So they're not allowed to work, or they lose their benefits. So it has to be accessible. There needs to be a mandate on that. It just has to be done. Forget the red tape. It's a human rights issue. These people have been ignored long enough. Give them pharmacare. Make sure they can take care of themselves. Make sure we get them the care they need to be happy and live with pride and dignity.
Thank you. I'm going to move to another question from the audience, if I may. So this comes from Julie Godet. The federal housing benefit and various rent subsidy programs are never funded sufficiently enough so that everybody who qualifies due to low income can access the benefits or subsidies. This creates two classes of poor: those who have a rent subsidy and those who do not. Social housing is one of the only social programs that is not made available to all who qualify. Does your party have a plan to make sure that future federal housing benefits are available to all and not just half the people who need the help due to low income? We'll start this with Liberal Party candidate Jenica Atwin.
Oh, thank you. And, you know, we absolutely are creating kind of two-tiered system, especially here in New Brunswick. And I think that that's a big piece when we're talking about housing. We have a different perspective, a different demographic, and different issues here in the Atlantic. And it's extremely visible by the programs that exist today. And, you know, a portable, rent subsidy would go a long way to really support people who need to move around for various reasons. It would cut some of the red tape that we're seeing. And, you know, again, anytime we have some of these income thresholds, it creates some of these issues, especially again, if we're looking at it from a national standpoint. So in the Atlantic, when we talk about the income thresholds, we've got to be a little more optimistic, much more flexible. And I really, really support, you know, again, the portable rent subsidies. It's not specifically in the platform, but it's something I will fight for. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby.
It's an interesting question. I would say, no, we should not be forgetting about the red tape that exists. So you have a right to a house. You know what's better than a right to a house? An actual house. I hear a lot of people say you have a right to food, you have a right to water. We need to make water a right. You know what's better than a right to water? Actual water. When you make it a right and you have government bureaucrats weigh in on the subject, what happens is starvation. When you allow us to just produce the object in question, like capitalist countries, you have gluttony being the problem. When we say housing is a right, there are jurisdictions that make housing a right, like Venezuela. There are jurisdictions in Western Europe. There's jurisdictions in Canada. Okay, you have a right to housing, and you see homelessness running rampant. Don't allow government bureaucrats to run the show. Allow us to just build. We want to increase the supply for people, lower rents, allow charities to build. This would be a wonderful thing.
Thank you very much. Next to the Green Party, Nicole O'Byrne.
Yeah, the Green Party in our platform, we have what's called a retroactive residential tenant support benefit, so that and it would be applied not on some kind of means test, right, but across the board for people who require the benefit, and to cut down on the red tape as well. Also, we need to look at cost sharing agreements when it comes to federal, provincial, municipal approaches to housing programs. Often one level of government is, electioneering, or they're using it for partisan purposes to say we're going to do all these great things, but they only pay out after, year 8, 9, 10 or whatnot. We've actually got to rationalize some of that system so people aren't just using it for political purposes to say we're doing all these great things. They're actually not putting all the components together that need to be done when you're talking about multi-layered, shared jurisdictional problems such as these approaches to housing.
Okay, thank you. NDP candidate, Shawn Oldenburg.
Thank you very much. This is a problem that it shouldn't be a bunch of paperwork. There are people who wouldn't qualify for it. So why don't we get rid of that? Those thresholds are created. They don't have to stay that way. If you just give a universal income, give everybody pharmacare, that saves people money, make them secure in that. And let's move on that. It can move forward. You tax the rich for it. It doesn't cost them much. It just has to be taken care of. There's Indigenous people who can't get a home, First Nations. Everybody is just, it's too much of a struggle. Let's just get it done, move forward, cut out the red tape.
Okay. Communist Party candidate June Patterson.
First, I think I do believe in increasing the supply of housing, but it should be a supply of social housing. We don't want real estate investment trusts building more so-called affordable units at $1,600 a month. Ultimately, we want to see the end of the system of landlording entirely, because really what all landlords are middlemen. Artificially reducing the supply of housing and keeping it away from people who need it. The solution is, we build 1 million units of social housing and we give it to first the people who need it most, but ultimately anybody who wants it. Anybody who wants to live in, quality social housing that is rented to you or using a rent to own scheme at 20% of your income. So yes, thank you.
Thank you. Finally, independent candidate Jen Smith.
Hi, thanks. I definitely think that we should be subsidizing, my son is getting a subsidy now. He's a single father of a young child in school. So he is staying in the apartment he is in, and he gets a small percentage paid for. So I think that's helpful to help people stay where they are. I definitely don't want to see a whole government funded social housing thing. Definitely not either. And equal access to people. I think it definitely, the lower the income, the more the help they need. And, I think most of us agree on a multi-pronged approach through levels of government. And it's so many issues with we need a living wage. We need something like UBI to pick up those who fall through the cracks, and there are always those who fall through the cracks. So we need to ensure that the most vulnerable are helped first, and we need to keep building. There's no way around it, and there's going to be real estate developers, but I think that it's important that we.
Jen, there's that time again. Jen Smith, the independent candidate, thank you. That wraps up our second question from the audience. So I will go to a third question from an audience member. This comes from Samantha Lyons. The housing crisis and lack of affordable housing is a contributor to mental health challenges. Speaking with the program director for the helpline, the crisis helpline, I was informed that a common reason for crisis calls recently has been housing. People experiencing anxiety and mental health issues as a direct result of not being able to secure housing or being on the verge of losing housing. What do you propose to do to address that? And I'll begin with the Communist Party candidate, June Patterson.
Hi, could you repeat the question?
I will. I'm just making sure that there's a preamble here, and I want to make sure I got this right. It's Samantha Lyons is writing about the affordable housing crisis and its contributor to mental health challenges. She says that the anxiety is coming up on crisis lines, people not being on the people afraid of being on the verge of losing their access to housing. There's a second part here, and she's asking, considering the connection between, I'm not sure. I can surmise that the question is, what would you do for people who? She's underlying how important it is for housing for people with mental health. Is there anything more that can be done to secure people's security in affordable housing? Why don't we start there?
Yes, I have personal experience with, anxiety around housing, precariously housed people. It does negatively contribute to mental health, certainly, as the environmental determinants of health, including mental health. We want to, in immediate measure would be to ban evictions and mortgage foreclosures, to prevent people from being thrown out onto the street. And then we need to, bring in a guaranteed annual livable income to ensure that people have enough money to live with dignity, whether or not they're able to work. And we also need to make sure that our social housing stock is built up and is made available to the people who need it. And that we also need to include mental health care comprehensively in Medicare.
Thank you. June Patterson, the way you took that was an interesting direction. I mean, one of the questions maybe implied here is, do you support, and June, I'd like to come back to you because I'm changing the question a little bit on the fly, but like, would you support a kind of rent cap or rent control that might help people feel more secure, stable, that their rent is stable and not suddenly going to jack up? We'll come back to you, June Patterson, if we could.
Yes, we support the immediate institution of rent controls. And ultimately, we would like to see rent capped at 20% of a person's income, no matter what that income is, to ensure that there are no unexpected rent hikes. Ultimately, what we want to see is we want to fight back against the power of these big developers and landlords and make sure that housing is given to people who need it and isn't used for profit.
Thank you. I'll put this same question to the Green Party candidate now, to Nicole O'Byrne.
Yeah, the Green Party is calling for a national moratorium on evictions and, of course, robust rent and eviction controls. And you check out the platform for more details. It's very, very comprehensive. But I'd like to say that the crisis is real. I mean, 2 weeks ago, I was at the market and a guy named Peter came up to me. His rent as of October 1st is going up 60%. And he started to cry and say that he's going to be homeless as of October 1st because there's no way that he can pay for that. And then, well, Charles LeBlanc came along and said, you know, if you're going to be a politician, you can't spend so much time with, with individual people. And I said, but this person's in real crisis. And honestly, the last 2 weeks, I've been really struggling with this because the need is urgent and it's right now. And so we can talk about policy and platforms all we want here tonight, but folks, this is an emergency and we need to move quicker than what us politicians and electioneering can do.
Thank you very much. To the Liberal Party candidate, Jenica Atwin.
Thank you. And, you know, as a member of parliament, you receive calls on a daily basis where people are extremely desperate. They're at the end of their rope. They are looking for a solution. And oftentimes it has to do with crushing poverty, with precarious housing. You know, they're tough conversations. And I absolutely do support a guaranteed livable income because it's a big way to address a lot of the stresses, the financial burdens. Everyone could kind of have that floor. A collective sigh of relief is kind of how I refer to it. And I think that this is, you know, and in so many of those conversations, it's the only concrete piece that I can see that would be across the board, something that would help individuals. You know, it's something we did see a government bill put forward, or it was a member of the House of Commons for the Liberal Party, and to see that it's being talked about by so many parties is really encouraging. I think this is a critical piece. I also do support, you know, capping rents. I think it has to be reflective of the need in the area. Also, that portable rent subsidy is such an important piece. So all of those combined, I think, would help address this, and mental health is a serious issue.
Thank you, Jenica Atwin. To Jennifer Smith now, an independent candidate.
Thank you. Yes, I absolutely agree with a rent cap. We need an acknowledgement that there is a housing crisis and there is a problem, you know, from Premier Higgs, and a level of support from the provincial government. And in the original question from the preamble, originally, it was mentioned about the crisis line. And again, like, I did have mental health issues myself in the past, like the more distant past, but the crisis line is only open so many hours a day. There is no help for mental health, literally. And, you know, financial stability does not guarantee good mental health. And having a house one day isn't going to make your mental illness suddenly disappear. So we need access to the resources, to more psychiatrists. The waiting lines are so long, you know, no direct billing. Mental health is a serious.
Thank you, Jen. NDP candidate Shawn Oldenburg.
Thank you. Yes, we do need rent control. Pharmacare, mental health are priorities. We need more doctors and a guaranteed income. We have to protect the vulnerable from getting evicted, and that is what the NDP does. I agree with you, June. The red tape we have to disappear that and just take care of people, regardless of what pains we may have to go through to help these people. It is what we do. So we need rent control. And the vulnerable people need protection so they cannot get evicted. And we have to look out for them. And the NDP looks out for everybody. We are the party for the people.
Thank you. To Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby.
Lots to unpack here. First, ever so briefly, I'll say, yeah, mental health is intertwined with poverty. Poverty is a progenitor. And so any sort of a poverty reduction program has to tackle cost of living. If you want to tackle cost of living, you have to tackle the collapse of the Canadian dollar so that people's purchasing power doesn't erode if they're on fixed incomes like minimum wage or seniors. The other issue I want to answer as a landlord first, I wouldn't have a problem, depending on what the rent control was. If somebody said, well, look, you can't increase rents by 60%, 100%. As a landlord, I wouldn't have a problem with that. That would be okay. I work with other landlords and we talk about what's an acceptable rent increase, something that's in tandem with property tax hikes or power bill hikes, what have you. I would have a problem if the rent control was such that I would have no desire to invest in New Brunswick, and we just can't increase properties because there are zero vacancies. There's minimal vacancies, and we can't have a situation like that. We have to have people invest.
Thank you, candidates. I will move to another question from the audience from Tobin Haley. Tobin writes, we have heard many tenants in New Brunswick are experiencing discrimination on the basis of race, ethnicity, disability, and family status. Is there a role for the federal government to combat this discrimination, and what would that look like? And we'll start with the Ndp, Sean Oldenburg.
Thank you. And that is a true story. There are people who are discriminated against, especially here in Fredericton. We have a lot of people who move here. They are facing discrimination. We cannot have that. The Ndp does not allow that. We treat people fair. We protect the people of Canada. It has to be done. You can't have certain rules for different people. We all have to be able to have the same quality of life, a same healthcare system that provides. We all deserve doctor, clean water everywhere in this country, and the Ndp always moves forward in what we want to do.
Thank you. Next, Liberal Party candidate Jenica Atwin.
Thank you. I think one of the important lessons that came out of the COVID-19 pandemic is the need for a distinctions-based strategy. We have to include race-based data in any of the decisions that we're making moving forward. We have to include an Indigenous perspective, a Northern perspective, a rural perspective, a disability perspective. And it's absolutely true. Even in the Fredericton area, there is increased experiences of racism. It's a very serious problem. I think the federal government, along with every level of government, has a large role to play. Our communities have a lot to play too. Our businesses have a big role to play. So it's a very big question, I think, especially in such a short period of time. But I mean, again, it's really about a focus on the distinctions-based housing strategy that is in the platform. And I'm excited to see it because a hard lesson was learned throughout the pandemic.
Thank you. Independent candidate Jen Smith.
Thank you. Yes, there is obviously systemic discrimination right across the board, all across New Brunswick. And, whether it be by race, by, religious minorities, and, like Jenica, gets a lot of calls. Nicole was, dealing with a stressful situation with somebody who really needed help. I also, provided assistance or helped navigate through the system. A gentleman who with addiction and mental health issues, who is a Muslim and, an immigrant to Canada. So they are, people are targeted and, having hurled racial insults or, that kind of idea. Like they're just, the whole system scares them. It just overwhelms them. So I think that, I just helped this guy make phone calls and, initiated some, help for him.
Thank you, Jen. Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby.
It's interesting. One of my units was actually run as a safe house for members of the LGBTQ plus community, and that was a very good thing, and I'm very proud of that. And there's a lot of progress there. But I'll tell you something that's horrifying, and it should shock all of you. I have dealt with declines on the mortgage side and on the real estate side where Indigenous people were declined. The very programs, and let this be a lesson for people who are interested in tenants' rights, because this is a lot of what I'm saying. The very programs that were meant to help people are actually hurting them. I've dealt with Indigenous people who have faced declines for purchasing a house that settlers, for example, did not have to face. They have to go through additional red tape, additional barriers, and this is not okay. Owning a house, if you can pass on $200,000, $300,000 of an asset to the next generation, this does a lot to end cyclical poverty. We have to get rid of this red tape because it is discriminatory.
Okay. To June Patterson now, Communist Party candidate.
Yeah, not only would we like to see, enshrined in law, banning discrimination based on any protected status for housing, but I think one way to deal with, discriminatory landlords and other entities is to force them out of the housing market by building subsidized housing, and ensuring that through direct oversight that all of this housing goes to people who need it, that nobody is declined unjustly, and that all people who need housing are given it, regardless of their income or any sort of protected status.
Okay, and to the Green Party candidate, Nicole O'Byrne.
Yeah, we've got a serious enforcement problem. We do have a charter of rights and freedoms in the country, and I kind of hope if the government gets back more into the housing business a little more directly, that of course you can enforce charter values and charter rights a little bit better when the government's directly involved. The problem is we've got private landlords, and what do you do with someone who's discriminating against you, not allowing you to rent a unit? Well, you go to the Human Rights Tribunal, you go to the rentalsman, and those are torturously long and protracted processes that ultimately lead to almost no remedy whatsoever. We have a serious problem with that needs to be addressed. So again, the law is okay, but if it's not enforced or there's not an easy way to navigate any of it, then that right is almost useless. And I'm afraid that we're in a very, very bad situation, especially in New Brunswick, with respect to the enforcement of renters' rights.
Okay, thank you, candidates, for fielding those questions from the audience. That brings us to closing statements. All candidates will have a minute for your closing statement. We'll go this time in alphabetical order by last name. We'll start with Liberal candidate Jenica Atwin.
Oh, well, thank you so much. And I think that our willingness to be here this evening suggests how important this is to each of us. I'm so proud of the candidates for their engagement and their conversations this evening. Thank you for your questions as well. Thank you, Rachel, for your moderation. Very quickly, again, just like to reiterate, I did have a town hall, Brandon, thanks for bringing that up. I care, I listen, this is incredibly important to me. It has to be incredibly important to all of us moving forward. Top issue in this election, again, at the doors, there's ways that we can address it. Unlock home ownership for those that want it. 1.4 million in new homes that are built, preserved, and revitalized by 2025. Protecting your rights. Take action against speculators. Reinvest in the rapid housing initiative that saw such success in the pandemic experience. Have a federal housing advocate to look after some of these issues around jurisdiction and enforcement. It's really critical that all these pieces come together, and I'm very committed as your candidate and hopefully your member of parliament moving forward to do that. Thank you very much.
Libertarian candidate Brandon Kirby.
I'm going to say it's been a fascinating conversation. You guys really brought the A+ questions, so thank you for it. Nicole, I think was spot on when she said the torturous process of going through the rentalsman with New Brunswick. We have to identify the ways in which government is getting in our way. We don't have the capacity to supply, not to end homelessness, not to bring rents down. We really are coming across a federal government that's just not willing to cooperate with people that want to solve this issue. We're out there. Let me tell you, we want to pour billions of dollars into the housing sector, and we're just not allowed to do so. We're facing declines, we're facing red tape. And so I hope that I've brought a different perspective and some different things for folks to consider. Thank you so much for inviting me. I know I'm a little bit of the bad guy, but I appreciate the inclusion.
Brandon Kirby, thank you. Green Party candidate Nicole O'Byrne.
I teach a course on Canadian federalism, and it was the students from that seminar who challenged me to get into politics by sending me an email saying maybe it's time to stop teaching Canadian federalism and start doing something about Canadian federalism. And I had to think about that for a couple of weeks, but now here I am. And these are exactly the kind of problems where we need to bring innovative, creative solutions to get all levels of government working together to incorporate First Nations government into the conversation in a meaningful way. The Green Party is the only party who's really going to prioritize nonprofit solutions to the housing crisis instead of just bolstering the free enterprise solutions, which we've seen fail over and over again for the last couple of generations. And I'd just like to end by saying, look, I'm not running to be prime minister, but I'm running to hold their feet to the fire. So when the Liberals or the Conservatives promise things, well, they might mean it, but they're going to actualize it a lot more if there's people who are constantly asking them questions and asking about delivery and implementation. So I propose to be that person on important initiatives such as housing.
Nicole O'Byrne, thank you. NDP candidate Shawn Oldenburg.
First of all, thank you once again to our host. So many great topics discussed here, and it's obvious why the missing candidate isn't here, because if we need real solutions, we can't keep going between the Conservatives and the Liberals. We know that time and time again. New Democrats are different because we are working people. For our whole history, we have fought for better working conditions and standards that lift everyone up. We know that good jobs treat people fairly, make a real difference to Canadian families. There is no labor shortage, it's a wage shortage. New ways of thinking can shape the recovery from the COVID-19 crisis, help make our economy fair, and deliver the results we all want. What we have seen in the past 6 years, a Liberal Prime Minister who loves to say the right thing, to promise to address the issues that matter to Canadians with no intention of ever delivering them, like pharmacare, electoral reform. 15 months ago, Jagmeet Singh called on Justin Trudeau to introduce paid sick leave. Then Mr. Trudeau waited until last month suddenly admit the federal government can indeed fund the paid sick leave. We have a Conservative leader who wants.
Shawn, if you can hear me, that's it. That is time. For a minute there. To the Communist Party candidate June Patterson.
Hello. I'd like to thank the organizers and my fellow candidates. You know, as a renter, I would promise to be a tireless advocate for working people in this riding, for renters, for people who need to pay mortgages. I am 100% free of political donations from landlords and REITs. I really want to make sure that every single person in this country has shelter over their head, because the truth is we have enough shelter for everybody. The issue is that there are people who are getting in the way, and these are landlords, developers, big investors, and I want to fight back against them. So send me to Ottawa and you would have a tireless advocate on behalf of tenants. Thank you.
June Patterson, thank you. Jen Smith, independent candidate.
Thank you. Yes. So I am an independent candidate for a reason. I was with, the Liberal Party for many years, and I was with the Greens for a little bit, and I was with the Ndp for a very short little while. And I'm sure Jenica may even have maybe a little glimpse into this now from moving from two different parties. You get a lot of perspective. There is no party that can claim moral authority. Nobody can be really slamming the other one. I'm an independent for a reason, because people need to come first. And what I have seen in politics and is party partisanship comes before people. So that is why I am an independent candidate, even though I have been with parties. So great questions. Again, I never had a chance to say thank you to the host, to Rachel, to the Coalition for Tenants Rights, to the Common Front Social Justice, and to ACORN. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you.
Well, we thank you all candidates for participating, very much appreciated. And thank you to our audience for joining in, very much. A reminder to everyone that this forum will be available for viewing again. That will be on the NB Media Co-op website. And before we let you go, the organizers would like to encourage you to attend two upcoming events on housing. Journalist Archie Mann has been covering the housing crisis for Canada Land. He will be delivering a public talk at the NB Media Co-op's annual general meeting that is coming up Thursday, September 23rd at 7 p.m. by Zoom. You can get more details, visit nbmediacoop.org. Also on World Cerebral Palsy Day, October 6th at 7 p.m., disability rights advocate Caitlin Layden will be talking about disability discrimination in housing. That will take place by Zoom. For more details, again, nbmediacoop.org. Good night, everyone. Thank you so much. Have a safe night. And don't forget, everybody, go out and vote.